right, hello and welcome to another Expert Insight interview. My name is John Golden from SalesPOP, online sales magazine and Pipeliner CRM, joining you as usual from a sunny San Diego. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Jacquelyn Goldberg, who is in lovely Miami, Florida on the other coast. How are you doing, Jacquelyn?
I'm great. How are you?
Excellent. And Jacquelyn is a VP of sales at Unframe, where you've helped scale the company to multiple millions in revenue in just under a year. You've spent a decade building sales organizations from scratch at AI and enterprise companies. You were the first sales hire at Pebble Post, later VP of Global Revenue at Sama. And you're widely known for hiring for grit and intellectual curiosity over pedigree. And so, what I want to talk about today is the changing face of sales, and especially you see a lot of salespeople have very impressive revenues, well, hopefully very impressive revenue too, but resumes, and then they go to like a company like an AI startup company or a company that's very like leading edge or progressive in that area, and then they don't do so well. Why is that?
It's a good question, and I think there's many reasons for that. Selling, I think it also depends what in AI you're selling, right?
Mhm.
What we're selling here specifically at Unframe and many companies right now is incredibly horizontal. And so you're talking about new product, new technology, new category across many different facets. And so I think people are used to having very specific plays that they can make, selling to specific personas, and we're in uncharted territory in terms of, again, new technology. Everything's moving really fast, and so you need people that can adapt to that versus fitting into systems.
Mhm. And I feel too that also without going off track a second, but I think that also is, for sales leaders and VPs, it's all of those there as the whole business model changes, the way of doing business changes, as the technology changes, and everything is even if they're very experienced, like say in SaaS, they may not, AI may blindside them.
It definitely may blindside them, and it the speed. I also find that part of it is the speed that is a
Mhm.
challenge. And here at Unframe, we hear often from candidates like, "This is the fastest that I've ever moved," and I think part of that is
Mhm.
true based on the company, but also it's just the AI world. Like, it's hard to imagine a world without Chat GPT and the things that you can do at speed now at your fingertips. It I know people are talking about shorter work weeks, but I don't see that happening in the foreseeable future. I just see us doing more and more with that time.
Yeah, no, 100%, and I think that's it, and I think it's funny too. I mean, we've been through this experience a number of times, but it's like, people just before AI, people in the SaaS industry are like, "Oh, moving so fast, and we're so innovative, and we're all of this," which it was for the time. But now this is like now it's making that look slow and kind of archaic.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So tell me, I like this. I like this concept of hiring for grit and intellectual curiosity over pedigree, because a lot of times in sales recruiting, we get very hung up on industry knowledge of being of pedigree background, all of that. I worked in an industry one time, and in a company which was a franchisor, and basically the franchisees would always hire somebody from one of the other franchises over somebody from the outside, regardless of how many times that other person had been fired, right? For unperform. They still reckon it was better to get somebody that at least knew the business, even if they were rubbish at it. I mean, it never made sense to me. But tell me why the focus on grit, I love that, and intellectual curiosity, which absolutely love it too.
Yeah, I think, and those are two terms that I often find folks here, and they're like, "I have that." And sure, I think every human, based on their own lens, probably has some version of that. But what it means to me is pretty specific. So, intellectual curiosity, it's the same vein to me as being a critical thinker,
Hmm.
and especially to the reasons I mentioned earlier in the call, we're in this new era. And as we try to figure out where the pockets of success are, we need folks that can just be a detective or a
Mm,
lawyer, right? And be good at asking the questions and come in with a point of view and be willing to be wrong and course correct. And you only
mhm.
know that through asking questions. And I often feel that sales, the historical way of thinking of it as a relationship, I find is different in this new era. So it's still relationship driven, but the definition of the relationship has changed, whereby it's not it's not one-sided of give, give, give to get, right? It's constant give, get. And by give,
Mhm.
get, I mean, what is important to you? And being able to follow the paper trail of that and asking questions, getting a little in return, really feeling like you're listening and giving more back
Yeah.
into how you can help them. And it's not just about like taking them to dinner, as an example. And so
Yeah.
that to me is where intellectual curiosity comes into play. That especially at we're a Series A startup, right? We are in a
Mhm.
very, as I mentioned, horizontal field. And
Yeah.
so having that lens is very, very important. We have an enablement team that is wonderful, but we're still figuring it out every single day. And so we need folks that are willing to roll up their sleeves and do that. And then that also goes hand in hand with grit, right? And grit
Mhm.
is incredibly important. It's about being able to, yeah, roll up your sleeves, as I mentioned before, find like where you can help yourself, raise your hand where you need help.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily about putting in more hours, it's about putting in the right hours in the right places and being able to run through walls to get there.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Just a couple of things to pick up on there. I think you're right. I think over the last like 20 years, I think a lot of salespeople got spoiled, especially by the
Yes.
inbound concept and everything, and they just had to sit there and wait for this stuff to come to them, and then they really were kind of, at the end of the day, they're really just product demos or product, or service, whatever. At the end, they became very good at that and less good at the other part. I think now it's flipped back. I totally agree with you. I think that intellectual curiosity, you have to engage in a collaborative process with the other person. As you said, it's an ongoing one. And if you're not asking good questions, if you're not listening, if you're not validating, if you're not exploring, then you're going to get left behind, frankly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, so what do you see yourself? I mean, what do you see yourself as, other than grit and intellectual curiosity, particularly for this new world? What kind of people are best suited, or are making the leap easier?
I think change is hard,
Hmm.
and those that are excited by change, maybe they're a little nervous, but nervous in a good way because there's so much, right? Even as we set up practices and messaging, and it's changing every week, and you have to be able to adapt to that.
Mm,
And that's also where, back to your original question around folks that have come from bigger companies, especially if they've been there for a long time, it can be very hard to adapt to change. And we are, again, it's not just Unframe specific, but we're in unprecedented times where
mm,
change is not just a constant, but at a pace that is so, so rapid, right? And like all the changes that Anthropic made in January, like we forget about what the world looks like even before then, right?
yeah.
And so it's you just have to keep up with it. And I think it's hard to keep up with it. It's a huge cognitive load, but those that
Mhm.
can embrace it are those that are going to survive in this new era.
Absolutely, and I think the ones who are willing to. I think there's a great time of experimentation, but you have to experiment, assess, and move pretty quickly, right? If it's not working, if it's not the right tool, it's not the right approach, scrap it, move on to the next one. And I think that's part of it. I think we have to become very, very good at assessing the tools we're using very quickly, assessing the strategies we're using very quickly, and course correcting very quickly.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah. What do you think enterprise buyers are looking for today that a lot of salespeople are not giving them? What are they looking for from when they do interact with a salesperson?
They are looking for that more consultative approach. So I
Mhm.
heard something yesterday that really resonated with me, which it was we are being evaluated against some point solutions that are very, very niche and specific to that
Yeah,
industry. And a lot of those point solutions are coming into the conversation and saying, we know your industry, we're the experts, this is what you need. And the
yeah.
reality is while that they may be experts in the industry, that individuals at companies are experts in their business. And that's
Mm,
something that enterprises don't, I think, appreciate enough, is that, like, they feel like they should be telling customers how to do things versus back to my original point, which is listening, finding those problems, and then collaborating with them on the solution.
yeah. No, absolutely. Because I mean, the first rule of communication is really that people believe conclusions they come to themselves over anything you can ever say to them. So only by questioning and following up and validating can you get somebody to explore in their own head so they come to the same conclusion that you're trying to get them to.
Exactly. People like to be heard.
Yeah. Recent surveys have said seen, heard, and understood. That's what people want.
Yeah. No matter if it's in business or your personal life, right? That's
Yeah.
what people want. They don't want you to come up with the next original idea. To your point, they would prefer it be theirs and they'd prefer to be understood.
Mhm. And I guess the other part too is, I mean, we've seen now if the smart salespeople who are embracing AI tools, right, in order to make themselves so much more prepared, so much more, to have so much more knowledge, to be much more credible, to turn up, like really being able to focus on real discovery and conversation, and those are really, I think, are kind of moving ahead faster than other people.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and what other innovative ways have you seen salespeople leveraging AI?
Um, I think using it in complex negotiations or decisioning to visualize better with some of the tools, like what it looks like, and to go back
Mhm,
and forth with that like instantly. So you're not wasting weeks or cycles. We've been working on some recently, and it just really feels like a game changer um, in a way that like you can't do an Excel sheet. And I
mhm.
think that's just a very small example, but one that I think is really powerful.
Absolutely. So you got you scaled to in 1 year, right? You went to multi-million-dollar ARR, right? Or
Correct.
so what do you attribute as the VP of sales? What do you attribute your success to?
I think a handful of things. Of course, the our product is top notch, and that
Mhm,
certainly has to be there. I think it also comes down to every person in the company feeling ownership, not
mhm,
just the sales team, and down to the engineers, to legal and finance, and just everyone burning the midnight oil together to get there, I think is really important. So the salespeople don't feel like they're on an island to do that. And we certainly have that in spades here, and everyone is working equally as hard. And everyone feels it in the company.
mhm,
And I think really listening to customer problems and finding the problems that are worth solving.
mm. That's a great point. I was going to pick up on two things there, but first of all, I want to the ownership. So that's a critical thing. So how is your company managed to engender that ownership across everybody? Because that's something that a lot of companies struggle with. Is having what falls below a certain level, people just don't feel ownership anymore.
It's about leading from the front.
Hmm.
And whether that's me, whether that's our heads of product, whether that's our head of R&D, our CEO, our COO, it feels like no matter time or day, everyone's available to help and to do it urgently.
Hmm.
And for them to do it themselves and find the right team members to do it alongside, nobody's above doing the work.
Yeah.
And so there's no excuse because if you're not gonna do it, your boss is gonna step in and do it for you, and that's certainly not a great look.
Exactly. One other thing you mentioned a moment ago that I wanted to come back on is you said is making sure you're solving the correct problem for your customers. And I think
Mhm.
that's a really important thing. I don't want to skip over it because that may seem, yeah, well, that's obvious, but actually, no, it's not. You'd be surprised how many companies end up either solving the wrong problem or half of the problem or, not understanding the problem in its totality.
I yes, and I think those were certainly pain points that we had in the beginning where we're like, "Oh, great, somebody has a problem, let's build it." And then I came
Mhm.
in as the head of sales. I was like, "Let's make sure this is a problem worth solving, or you're going to come to me say, why aren't any of these deals closing?"
Exactly.
And so it has to be an urgent problem that is going to have material impact on the business. Now, it doesn't need to be the biggest problem, but it needs to
Mhm.
be one that's worth solving.
Yeah, and one that has some urgency around it, right? Because I mean, lots of companies have problems, and I think that goes back to what you said about um, when you have people with intellectual curiosity. Because one of the traps that salespeople often fall into, especially rookie ones, whatever, is if I have a conversation with you, the first time you mention something that sounds like a problem I can solve, I dive on it because I'm like, yes, and I just go down. Now, could turn out to be a problem that it's not a big issue for you. It's one you can live with. It's one that there's no
Yeah.
urgency around. But I've now like gone laser focus on it, as opposed to getting deeper into the conversation and then discovering, okay, yeah, that's a problem, but it's not a big problem. Now we can move on to some other ones.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that's something that obviously you need to have good questioning skills and that for. So, when your team, do you practice and role play and stuff and practice engaging with customers and prospects?
We do that a little bit, candidly, we're building the plane while we're flying it as a Series A
Sure.
company, and so we're starting to put in more of that scaffolding.
Hmm.
We use a call recorder, called Attention, that has a lot of automation built into it, so we can have scorecards and things along those lines to track if people are doing these things or not, to be able to very quickly pick that up.
Yeah. So yeah, so describe for me your ideal candidate because I mean this will be interesting for other people, especially across companies, who are in the same who are in the AI space or ones that are trying to be innovative and they're looking for, what kind of person should I be hiring now? Because especially when some of the traditional, like I said, even like some of the great SaaS sellers are flaming out when they come here.
Yeah, I think we're still figuring that out. I often find that folks that have sold if they've only sold big companies, for me, that's a challenge to take a flyer on at this stage for an early
Hmm.
stage startup. If they've had a mix, that's great, or only startup, that's fine too. And there, we do some assessments to gauge intellectual curiosity, et cetera. There's a line of questioning we have as well to help gauge that. I would say in terms of backgrounds though, yes, definitely ideally some startup experience and a complex sale. So whether that be a platform or even a consulting stint at some sort, like is often helpful to figure that out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I would agree with you. Yeah, it's difficult for people to come from large companies to startups. It's a difficult leap because sometimes they may come in with all, yeah, this is going to be great, and yeah, and then suddenly they're, uh, who handles this? Nobody. Who handles that? Nobody. Oh, where's the whatever team? No, we don't have one.
Yeah, and I'd say in the interview process when I've had those, I spend a lot of time digging in and I think they know, but the reality is you
Yeah,
never know unless you've done it yourself. And I know that folks are like, how do I break in? And it's hard. Like you're going to have to really prove it to yourself by being scrappy in the interview process itself is what I would say.
yeah,
And showing scrappiness. I It's hard at an early stage startup to take a flyer on somebody at bigger companies. We require all of our reps to have 25% of their own pipe. If you're at a
mhm,
bigger company, you have a big logo. You do not know what it is like to build your own pipe without the big logo name.
yeah. And I think, Jack, and that is going to be a major issue going forward. As I said, I think a lot of people have been used to not building their own pipeline, to be having a lot of stuff fed to them. I don't think that's sustainable, frankly, and I think the world is changing, and so I think, yeah, um, it's a challenge. If you're out of the habit of creating your own pipeline, or at least some of your own pipeline, it's a very hard thing to go back to.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah, especially when you've been used to everything being like handed up on a plate to you. Um, okay, so so what's next for Unname, sorry, what's it called? Unframe. My bad. Unframe.
What's next?
Yeah,
We're scaling rapidly. We have a lot of traction, and we're just trying to hire great people to help us capture that.
absolutely. Well, it's the great Jacquelyn. All Jacquelyn's information will be below this video. But before we go, just remind people again about you and what you do.
My name is Jacquelyn Goldberg. I'm our VP of Global Sales at Unframe. Unframe is an AI company. We are a managed AI delivery platform where we find complex problems and we solve them in a matter of days for enterprises. We do not charge for our POCs, and customers only pay when they're satisfied with the output.
Wow. That's fantastic. Well, that's a great, obviously very confident, and that's great to see somebody that confident in your product or service. So there you go. If there's something you're interested in, check the information below. And as I said, they don't charge for proof of concept, and you pay when you're satisfied. So all good. So thanks again, Jacquelyn. Thank you for watching and listening, and see you all again very soon. Thank you.